Prince William uncovered something deeply troubling inside Queen Camilla's private estate. Something that was never meant to be there. What he found wasn't just a royal heirloom, it was a spark that ignited a scandal. Secrets buried in Raymill House are now unraveling fast, and the monarchy may never recover. The day the palace cracked. What was meant to be a quiet charity event at Raymill House would soon explode into one of the most humiliating moments in Queen Camilla's royal life. On the surface, it was just another evening fundraiser, a small private reception supporting children's education. But behind the ivy-covered walls of Camilla's private estate, the crown itself was about to shake. It started with something so small, it could have been missed. A new house servant, only weeks into her duties, was tidying one of the upstairs guest rooms when she spotted an old, unfamiliar brooch lying on the floor. Thinking it was just a forgotten accessory, she placed it on a dresser, assuming someone would retrieve it later. But this wasn't just any ornament. It was a piece unmistakable to those who knew the collection. A brooch that once belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. A royal heirloom that had gone missing from the royal vault months earlier. And suddenly, it was lying casually in Camilla's private home. Unsecured, unexplained. Within the hour, Princess Anne arrived. Her presence at the estate had not been announced. She was not there for public relations. She was there for business. And what she walked into would ignite a royal confrontation no one expected. Anne spotted the brooch instantly. What followed was explosive. The usually composed Princess Anne raised her voice, called Camilla a thief, and demanded to know how the item ended up in her house. Guests were still mingling downstairs, but upstairs, staff and guards could hear everything. Camilla tried to stay calm, reminding Anne there were people around, but Anne didn't care. She looked her dead in the eyes and said the words everyone remembered. "Even with a crown, you'll never be queen." Then came the moment that froze the entire estate. Prince William walked in. Security had called him after overhearing the confrontation. He entered the room quietly, looked once at Camilla, once at Anne, then turned and walked out. He said nothing, stayed less than 30 seconds, and in that silence, the message was louder than any outburst. He wasn't there to defend Camilla. He was there to witness the truth. The event continued downstairs, but the atmosphere had changed. Guests noticed Charles's face when he appeared later. His expression was tight, his smile forced. Behind closed doors, a family meeting took place. Anne's voice echoed through the halls. Even as Charles urged calm, she refused to let the matter rest. Outside, no official statement was made, but the whispers began. And the question everyone was asking was this: what else was hidden in Camilla's estate? The answer would only deepen the crisis. Royal vaults, missing treasures, and one suspicious estate. The Royal Vault is no ordinary storage room. It's a heavily protected chamber that holds some of the most priceless heirlooms in British history. Crowns, jewels, insignia, and personal items passed down through generations of monarchs. Every item is catalogued, tracked, and fiercely guarded. So when a missing heirloom turned up casually lying on a dresser inside Queen Camilla's Raymill house, alarm bells didn't just ring, they exploded. Raymill had always been Camilla's retreat. Purchased in 1996, after her divorce from Andrew Parker Bowles, it was where she found privacy away from the public and the press. It was the backdrop of family weddings, private celebrations, even official birthday portraits. But now, it was something else entirely. A suspected hiding place. Immediately after the explosive confrontation with Anne, palace officials were authorized to conduct a quiet search of the estate. They didn't want another scandal, so it was done discreetly, without public knowledge. For hours, senior staff and private security combed through rooms, drawers, and safes. They found nothing else, only the brooch. But one item was enough, because it raised a far more dangerous question. Was it the only thing Camilla had taken, or just the only one she hadn't hidden well enough? As soon as news leaked through the palace ranks, aides began whispering about old rumors, stories they once dismissed. A missing pendant, a sapphire hairpin last seen in Queen Elizabeth's private collection. Items loaned to Camilla for events that were never returned. At the time, no one questioned her. She was the queen consort, the wife of the king. But now, everything was suspect, and the public noticed. Online forums, tabloids, and commentators jumped on the story. Hashtags began trending. Social media flooded with accusations of greed and entitlement. Commentators asked the blunt question, why was Queen Elizabeth's property in Camilla's private home at all? There were no good answers, and Buckingham Palace remained silent. That silence only fueled the storm. People began connecting dots, her sudden rise to power, her past controversies, and now her alleged possession of things that weren't hers. What else had been taken from the monarchy? From Diana? From the public? The scandal had crossed a line, because in the British monarchy, the crown's property is sacred. It doesn't belong to individuals. It belongs to the institution. And if Camilla had crossed that boundary, whether by accident or intention, then she had also crossed the king. When you take what was never yours, the crown has only one answer. And that answer was coming. Because if this heirloom was the tip of the iceberg, the palace had no choice but to act. And the next to act was Charles himself. Princess Anne's fury, the battle of blood versus betrayal. The brooch was more than jewelry, it was their mother's. And for Princess Anne, that meant one thing. It wasn't just stolen, it was desecrated. Her fury didn't fade with the evening. If anything, it escalated. The next morning, as the sun rose over Raymill House, the atmosphere was thick with tension. A family crisis meeting was called. Charles, still stunned from the night before, asked for calm. But Anne wasn't there to stay quiet. She sat across from Camilla and didn't mince words. There was no protocol, no royal filters, just a sister defending her mother's memory. "You've been wearing the crown, Camilla," she said, "but you never earned it." Camilla tried to speak, tried to explain, but Anne wasn't interested in explanations. Because this wasn't about one brooch. It was about everything. Years of tension, mistrust, and unresolved resentment poured out in that room. What the public didn't know, what even some inside the palace chose to ignore, was that Anne and Camilla had history. Deep, bitter, personal history. Decades ago, Anne had been involved with Andrew Parker Bowles, the same man Camilla would go on to marry. The relationship, though never formal, had been real, and its end wasn't clean. Over the years, Anne had watched Camilla move through the royal orbit with quiet determination, through scandal, divorce, Diana's heartbreak, and eventually into the role of queen consort. And she never approved of any of it. So when she found her mother's brooch tucked away in Camilla's private home, it wasn't just about theft. It was about legacy, respect, and lines that had finally been crossed. The room was frozen. Even Charles couldn't stop her. Camilla sat stiff, her face unreadable. But for the first time in years, she looked truly shaken. Aides later said that Anne's words were not a performance. They were a reckoning. The outburst wasn't random. It had been building for years. And now, with the Queen gone and the monarchy entering a new chapter, Anne was done pretending to tolerate a woman she never saw as one of them. "You may wear the crown," Anne told her, "but you'll never carry our blood." The words landed like a final sentence. No more confrontation followed, because what needed to be said had already been said. But for Charles, it was the look on William's face that stayed with him, that silent disapproval, that walkout. The heir to the throne had already made up his mind. And now, so had the king. What started with Anne's fury would soon turn into Charles's reckoning. A marriage of secrets and silent regrets. For Charles, the hardest truths aren't shouted, they arrive in silence. And silence is exactly what he remembered when he thought back to his recovery in Sandringham just months earlier. Lying in bed, weakened by cancer treatment, he had expected calls, visits, a hand to hold. But there was none of that. Not from Camilla. The headlines had praised her poise, her public strength. She smiled for the cameras, wore the crown with confidence, shook hands in hospital corridors. But behind the scenes, she never came to see him. Not once. At first, Charles made excuses for her. Public duties, long schedules, health concerns. But deep down, he felt it. She had checked out. The woman who had fought to be by his side for decades was now emotionally missing. And the man who once ignored Diana's tears could now feel the same kind of absence. It brought back memories he had buried. Diana's words, her pleas, her warnings. She had told him plainly, "If you choose her, you'll lose both." He hadn't listened, and now, staring into the quiet corners of their once shared life, he wondered if that decision had cost him everything. He had chosen Camilla, not just over Diana, but over tradition, over public opinion, over the judgment of his own family. And now, she stood accused of hiding royal heirlooms. Princess Anne had called her a disgrace. William had walked out of her presence. The public was growing restless. And all Charles could ask himself was, had I been blind this whole time? He looked at Catherine, calm, poised, loved. He saw how the public embraced her not because of a title, but because of who she was. It reminded him of what he once had with Diana, and what he had ignored. Camilla's absence during his illness was only part of it. The scandal at Raymill, the whispering staff, the dismissive way she handled it all, it had opened his eyes. For the first time, he saw not a partner, but a woman in love with power, not with him. "She loved the crown," he whispered one night to a close aide, "but not the man beneath it." There were no confrontations after that, no arguments. Charles didn't shout, accuse, or condemn. He did what monarchs have always done when the crown is at risk. He began to act, quietly, formally, finally, and it started with her title. The final betrayal, the queen who took too much. There are mistakes, and then there are patterns. For King Charles, the discovery of the missing brooch wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern finally exposed. When security briefings reached his desk, confirming the heirloom had never been authorized for removal, Charles knew what he had to do. This wasn't about one item tucked away in a drawer. This was about trust. And Camilla had just broken it beyond repair. Worse still, the reports didn't end with the brooch. Old suspicions began resurfacing, faint whispers about other items gone missing over the years. pieces borrowed for events but never returned, jewelry from Queen Elizabeth's private collection that seemed to vanish without record. No one had dared question Camilla before. She was the queen. She was untouchable. But now that shield was gone, insiders began to talk. An old aide remembered an incident during a 2022 trip when Camilla insisted on traveling with a set of jewels no one could locate afterward. Another mentioned a sapphire pendant that mysteriously disappeared after a state banquet. On their own, none of these instances had raised alarms, but together they painted a darker picture. The question was no longer, did Camilla cheat the system? It was now, has she been doing this all along? Charles felt the weight of it. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was institutional. Camilla hadn't just distanced herself from him during his illness. She had treated the crown's possessions as her own. Not heirlooms, not legacy, not history. Just things to be collected, worn, and hidden away. And that was the final breach. Because this wasn't a woman who had made a mistake. This was a woman who had been playing a very long game, and she had finally been caught. She didn't steal the jewels, one palace insider remarked quietly. She stole the crown, piece by piece. Charles didn't confront her. He didn't ask for explanations. He didn't need them. The decision had already been made, not in anger, but in clarity. What had started as suspicion had now become conviction. Camilla was no longer fit to hold the title she had once fought so hard to wear, and Charles would make sure the world understood that. The title is taken. The moment was silent, almost too silent. There was no announcement, no press conference, no dramatic statement from the palace. But behind the scenes, it happened, quickly, legally, and without hesitation. The paperwork was signed by the king himself. Effective immediately, Camilla would no longer be styled as Her Majesty the Queen. She would be referred to in all official matters as former consort, not queen, not majesty, just a title quietly stripped and never to return. Her portraits were the first to go. Across government buildings, royal institutions, and ceremonial halls, staff were instructed to take them down. Her image, once hung proudly beside Charles's, was now replaced with solo shots of the king or with newly framed portraits of Catherine and William. Within days, her name vanished from future royal rosters. She was no longer invited to briefings. Her schedule cleared, her engagements reassigned. Her charities informed that her involvement had ended due to restructuring. Behind palace walls, the instruction was even colder. All references to Her Majesty Queen Camilla must be corrected. Even her communications team was disbanded without notice. No one left to manage her press. No one to write her speeches. No one to protect her image. The woman who had once fought so hard to control the narrative was now left voiceless. But the loudest statement wasn't what the palace said. It was what they didn't say. There was no denial, no apology, just silence. Deliberate, precise, and royal. And everyone understood what that meant. In the royal family, silence is the loudest form of punishment. Camilla didn't respond publicly. There were no interviews, no tears, no final message to the nation. She returned quietly to Raymil House, her private estate, now stripped of royal significance. From queen to commoner, the fall had been swift, clinical, and absolute. Charles had made his decision. He didn't need the world's approval. He needed the crown to survive. And in that survival, Camilla had become the sacrifice. But while she faded into silence, someone else was stepping into the light. Not with scandal, but with grace. Because where one crown fell, another began to shine. Catherine rises, Camilla falls. While Camilla was being pulled from the spotlight, Catherine was being moved to the center of it. And the difference couldn't have been more striking. One woman was losing titles, respect, and public favor. The other was gaining it all, not because she chased it, but because she embodied it. Where Camilla had always fought to be accepted, Catherine didn't have to fight. She was already loved. The shift inside the palace was quiet but undeniable. Camilla's name was being erased from royal documents, but Catherine's was being added to them. Duties, events, charities, all roads now led to the Princess of Wales. It started with the patronages. Several of Diana's former royal causes, once reassigned to Camilla during Charles's efforts to legitimize her reign, were now transferred to Catherine. Mental health, children's advocacy, women's shelters, all given new life under her care. And the public responded immediately. Approval ratings soared. Headlines praised her grace. Polls showed her as the most admired royal in the country. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Catherine's strength wasn't in speeches. It was in consistency, showing up, listening, leading without ego. While Camilla had been accused of taking what wasn't hers, Catherine was handed responsibility and carried it with dignity. Charles noticed. Everyone did. What struck palace insiders most was how fast the internal dynamic changed. William and Catherine were now seen as the true heart of the monarchy. Charles, stepping into a more ceremonial role, began leaning on his son and daughter-in-law to handle the emotional weight of the crown. And for the first time in years, the monarchy started to feel stable. Catherine didn't ask for this moment. She earned it. She never demanded the spotlight, one aide said, but somehow it always found her. Camilla, on the other hand, had become invisible, removed from public events, no longer referenced in speeches, not even acknowledged in the king's appearances. It was a contrast too sharp to ignore. Because where Camilla had climbed her way into royalty, Catherine had grown into it, and the public could tell the difference. What the palace saw now wasn't just a shift in titles, it was a changing of the guard. One queen consort had fallen, and the next queen, the future queen, was already rising. But to understand the full collapse of Camilla's position, we have to go back even further. Because her entire reign wasn't just built on controversy. It was built on a scandal that started long before she ever wore a crown. A queen built on scandal and shadows. Camilla's crown didn't come from love. It came from survival. For years, her image was shaped not by admiration, but by controversy. From the very beginning, her path into royalty had been tangled in one of the most painful stories the monarchy had ever known: the collapse of Charles and Diana's marriage. Her affair with Charles began while both were involved with other people. She was married to Andrew Parker Bowles. He was dating Diana's sister. But somehow, their private relationship slipped past public view, until it didn't. The world learned about Camilla the hard way. It started with rumors. Then came the bracelet, the one engraved with Charles and Camilla's private nicknames. Diana found it just days before her wedding and nearly called everything off. But the ceremony went on, and so did the betrayal. The cracks in the marriage formed early. After the birth of Prince Harry, Diana was increasingly isolated. And Charles? He returned to Camilla, emotionally, privately, and eventually, openly. The infamous tapes leaked. The tampon phone call became one of the most humiliating royal scandals in modern history. And through it all, Camilla stayed close, not in the background, but in the shadows, waiting. When Diana finally told her story, the world listened. In her now legendary BBC interview, she spoke plainly. "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." Camilla's name was never far from the blame. For the breakdown, for the betrayal, for the pain. And yet, she climbed. Slowly, strategically. With press management, public appearances, and Queen Elizabeth's reluctant approval, she rose to the title of Queen Consort. But the truth never left the public's mind. To many, she would always be the other woman, the one who stood where Diana should have. Her entire reign was a balancing act. Royal acceptance on one side, public resentment on the other. For years, she walked that tightrope, until the Ray Mill scandal snapped the wire beneath her. Because Camilla's reign wasn't built on legacy, it was built on damage control, and now there was nothing left to control. She built her throne on a secret, one commentator said, and secrets always surface. As the monarchy looks ahead, her story fades. Not with applause, not with tribute, but with quiet removal. Because in the end, Camilla didn't lose the crown overnight. She lost it the moment she tried to take what was never truly hers. A secret love triangle that destroyed everything. Before she wore a crown, Camilla wore control. Her history with Charles was never built on love alone. It was built on secrets. And it all began with a triangle the royal family never escaped. In the early 70s, Princess Anne was involved with Andrew Parker Bowles. But she couldn't marry him. He was Catholic. Camilla swooped in. She married Andrew, but insiders whispered Anne and Andrew stayed close. And Camilla knew it. Then came Charles. He and Camilla met, clicked, became lovers. But when Charles went off to the Navy, she married Andrew anyway. The relationship with Charles never truly ended. Even after his engagement to Diana, Charles gave Camilla a bracelet, engraved with their secret nicknames. Diana found it, and never forgot. Their affair outlived Diana's patience. Secret visits, phone calls, letters. Then came the leak. Camillagate. Charles caught telling Camilla he wanted to live inside her trousers, a national embarrassment. They didn't just betray the crown, a headline read, they humiliated it. Years later, Camilla married Charles, but the damage was done. Her rise to queen was always linked to Diana's downfall, and eventually it would all come back to destroy her. The king's final strike. The brooch scandal was the breaking point. Camilla hadn't just betrayed Charles, she betrayed the monarchy. Charles quietly rewrote his will. Everything, wealth, estates, influence, went to William. Camilla received a small pension and nothing else. She held the crown, a courtier said, but was never meant to pass it on. The final blow? A Diana Memorial Garden at Kensington Palace. Camilla's name erased from royal archives, removed from events, and forgotten by the firm. Now, she lives in quiet exile, a queen once in name only. In the end, silence sealed her fate. What Prince William found changed everything. Camilla's actions have raised serious questions about trust, loyalty, and her place in the royal family. With the palace silent and tensions rising, this discovery could mark the final turning point. One thing's clear: nothing inside Camilla's estate was as innocent as it seemed.